To all my friends and homies who are going to watch this video, because this is mostly just for like the gang and just because I wanted to get my very personal thoughts out there. This is my tier list. It's going to be pretty rudimentary and not that professional, but I'll promise I'll try my best. So let's start. So in alphabetical order, we're going to talk about each Warframe and just my very personal thoughts on them within the current meta of Warframe at the end of the big 2025, and all in all, just where I very personally think they stand in the meta. So starting with the actual Ninja Frame Ash, right off rip. So right off rip, I would personally throw him probably in the B tier. Again, as you can see from my tiers, my fellas who will watch this, I basically give a description of essentially my criteria for any given tier. And in the case for Ash, I would put him in B because I do think he's subpar but very usable. Now, what do I mean by that, right? Ash's gimmick as a Warframe, especially given the recent Exalted weapon rework and the fact that his 4 is now moddable because Shadow Clone's Prime. The reason he's subpar is because Shadow Clone's Prime is just within the current like spectrum of Warframe, just kind of slow and not all that usable or great, in the sense of like it will most certainly kill whatever the fuck you target it with, because it'll, with proper modding and investment, it will do just like actually 50 million damage because Wrathful Advance. However, again, it's slow and it's just way too like, is just way too like impractical within the current spectrum of Warframe. So again, I personally would not like use Ash all that often in most content, but again, he is very useful. Like if you want to go into like a survival, or maybe if you fancy level cap, he'll definitely get the job done because you will live and you will kill things and you'll get the job done. He has some niche armor strip with the augment on his 1. So all in all, I do think Ash belongs in B tier in 2025. Moving on to Atlas. Again, I personally would put Atlas in average, mainly because he can be used in a lot of facets like Ash. Like this is like B minus and this is like B plus, by the way. Let me just change that real quick. Again, very rudimentary list. I put Atlas in B plus, mainly just because he has one build and does one thing, and he does that one thing decently well, which is landslide. Anyone who's played this game or has, or knows anything about Atlas fully understands that Atlas has one ability, and that is landslide. You will do landslide, and everything in the immediate area will indeed perish. But the rest of his kit is more or less useless outside of the niche that is Petrify, especially with the augment. His 2 isn't real and hardly does anything in terms of both damage and overall like utility. His rumblers have the most like goofy AI I've ever seen and hardly do any like notable damage. And even the like augment for it to make yourself a rumbler, you lose your mobility, and in a game like Warframe, honestly doesn't feel great, and even in practical uses isn't that strong either. But again, landslide just hard compensates for his kit so heavily, especially again with the recent Exalted rework and the fact that landslide Prime is now moddable. You can use shit like melee influence or melee exposure to make this shit actually just be a hydrogen bomb at the localized location, which makes it worth modding for. But ultimately speaking, it's just not all that crazy strong, but you'll get the job done. And because you're invulnerable while punching, you will be survivable and you can take it into a lot of content. So, that's why I put Atlas there. Moving on to Banshee, I would put her in C tier, but I would honestly bridge her toward D tier. But for the Banshee players out there, and because I can't do her super dirty like that, I'm going to put her right here. Now, why do I put Banshee in the C tier? it more or less boils down to she's been extremely power crept over the course of Warframe. Now, to be clear, Banshee is not dog shit. By no means is she dog shit. It's just that what she does, a lot of other Warframes can do infinitely better, and she has a lot of glaring issues. Silence not being recastable is a huge fucking problem. Soundquake is nearly useless and is one of the easiest helmet slots in ever. Sonar is one of the single biggest damage buffs in the game, and you will actually do near billions of damage when that shit's on people. But again, it's slightly impractical due to the fact that you have to be giga accurate, and in the AoE meta that we currently exist in, precision like that is mostly like whatever. The armor strip from Sonic Boom can be decently useful, but armor strip as a whole is a lot less useful nowadays with the changes to armor and the changes to enemy health values. But again, she can still work. You can make her survivable with the Helminth. Again, you have the single biggest damage steroid in the fucking game because you make enemies take like legit orders of magnitude more damage via sonar. But because of her survivability issues and the fact that, again, to a degree, like, things are just better executed on other Warframes, I can't really put her too high. So she's getting a C tier for me. I do think she needs a bit of a rework, because I don't think that her kit necessarily is that fundamentally flawed. I just think that it has issues that are very glaring in the current age of Warframe. Baruch. I honestly would put Baruch in average, mainly just because Baruch's one is effectively useless, in my honest opinion, just because it encourages you to not play the game, and it's technically speaking supposed to be a way you erode your restraint so that you can use Serene Storm. However, there's a more effective method to do this in his 2 when you run negative duration. However, there's an enemy and line of sight check for this, which, take it away, DE, there's no reason it should exist. And it ultimately slows down his gameplay a lot. So Baruch is great. His 4 has some sick augments that make it great. The recent Exalted rework also helped him out because God knows Serene Storm do be hitting, because Serene Storm does not have line of sight checks, because you can just phantom punch people through walls and it will just kill people. And he's great because his 3 gives some great survivability because you disarm motherfuckers, and it gives you damage reduction. And also to a lesser degree erodes restraint. I do think restraint on a personal level is a quite silly mechanic, and I do think that it needs some looking at in terms of how one builds it, and I do think the internal cooldown of lull needs to just be fucking removed, but that's just me. Baruch gets a solid B tier for me. Well, B+. Caliban. I actually think Caliban is deserving of A tier. Now, the reason I believe Caliban is deserving of A tier, where is he? So the reason I think Caliban is deserving of A tier more or less boils down to the fact that, well, he recently got a bunch of like changes in his lethal progeny summons, so that now these things hit like an actual truck because they have like 7 billion fire rate. Razor Gyre is actually a great ability that kind of just gets the job done in terms of, you know, your status chance, your regen, and your energy refund on enemy, which allows you to have pretty good energy economy. All in all, he's a solid frame, and his recent rework just made him a lot better. I don't really have too much to say. I think he's just good. Moving on to Chroma. If I'm being honest with you, Chroma goes here in C tier, and the reason is exactly why it is exactly the C tier description. Chroma is very high investment, and he's okay with very high investment. Ultimately speaking, right, Spectral Scream is a useless ability that you should never cast, literally ever. Effigy is a nearly worthless ability that you should never cast outside of the very specific niche of Profit Taker. But even then, Profit Taker itself has been power creeped a bit in terms of credit farming and is also not really all that great anymore. Still pretty good though. And with the way Vex Armor and Elemental Ward work, although they do provide solid buffs, these buffs are percentage damage buffs and not final or additional damage buffs, meaning that these overlap with Serration and ultimately don't result in that much of a damage increase anymore. Again, given current Warframe. So what Chroma ends up being in practicality is a glorified Serration mod, which obviously, if you know how to play this game and mod, isn't that great either. He, again, is usable because, especially given the recent Old Peace update with Arcane Preservation being a thing in the game, and him having a decent amount of armor to begin with, you can make it so you'll live and that you can do the whole weapons platform thing, so which means he's very useful. But you do have to build an insane amount of power strength to get that going. And even with all that investment, he is just not that great, which is why he's going in C tier. Very high investment, but ultimately not that great. Citrine is one of the easiest S tiers I've ever seen in my fucking life. In short, right, to those who haven't played Citrine, you could have one mod on this Warframe, and she will function like a Ford Mustang. She is great. Now let me explain myself. Her one effectively prints energy because you tag enemies with this shit. They take a bunch of slash, which is mostly whatever, and then they have a 50% chance to drop health orbs and a 20% chance to drop energy orbs, which is affected by power strength, meaning there comes a point where you're guaranteed to drop health orbs, which means you have, effectively speaking, an infinite amount of energy to work off with. Her 2, Preserving Shell, gives her hella damage mitt up to 90%, affected by assists from allies and kills from yourself, along with free health regen via her passive, which helps her survivability greatly. Her 3, Prismatic Gem, effectively speaking, whenever you or allies shoot enemies within the crystal, start applying rapidly stacks of every given status, which is some of the most disgusting fucking status priming I've ever seen, literally ever. This shit will just give enemies stage 27 cancer upon contact, and things will simply fucking die. The problem with this ability, or at least minor inconvenience more accurately, was that it was mostly stationary, and you had to build an absurd amount of range to make it good in practical use cases when you aren't in missions where you're allowed to be super stationary, until they added the augment for it that makes it so your Prismatic Gem attaches to your companion, making it fully mobile, allowing you to spread your influence of cancer spreading via yourself or your allies across the map. And with companions being as strong as they are, shout out to my boy Panzer Volpophyla, this shit goes crazy. Her 4 is honestly not a ton to write home about. You get some guaranteed red crits when you slap the crystals, and it's a little bit of CC. But this is mostly not that great unless you're running the augment, but it's still guaranteed red crits, and making every primary and secondary in the game be guaranteed red crits is obviously valuable. All that being said, she's a fantastic Warframe. She requires next to no investment to function, and at high investment, she is just a monster for both herself and her allies, because she turns every single weapon in the game into an automatic status primer that will just simply result in enemies perishing and dying, along with having infinite energy and nutty damagement for herself. Also a solid shield gator because she can just mash her one. Citrine is one of the easiest S tiers ever, and you should play her. Her farm is cancer though, so I'm sorry. My boy Sight09, or spoilers to those who didn't play 1999, Quincy. Also an easy S tier. In short, right? Quincy kind of does everything you'd want a Warframe to realistically do. Basically ever. So he has free wall hacks and can shoot through walls via his 1, which also makes him take more weak point damage, which is the core of this Warframe setup. Resupply is one of the most busted abilities I've ever seen because you get access to legit every element in the fucking game, mixed or based, along with a free additional damage, which is a final damage multiplier, by the way. His 3 is quite literally infinite stealth, assuming you can land some headshots, which there's ways to cheese this. And his exalted sniper is the headshot machine. You touch weak points, it bounces to other enemy weak points. They take 7 billion damage, and they fucking perish because you massively overkill them with a combination of your resupply plus your 1, plus the evade multiplier, and arcane crepuscular is a thing in the game. Let's say you're less patient and you just want to run around, shoot bad guys, and blow things up in the typical Warframe run and gun fashion. You can still do that by subsuming off of his neutralizer. There's a ton of weapon platform setups where you just basically use resupply to give yourself any given element. Press 3, slap whatever helmet you want on here. Unfortunately, it cannot be roared because DE is digital extremes. And then you just run around invisible, blowing shit up with like the Kuvazar or something, just absolutely nuking rooms and not playing the Warframe as intended. But who fucking cares? Because we're playing Warframe. TLDR, there is almost no content in the game where Sight isn't going to do great. And he has variable playstyles and also doesn't require that much investment to function as a Warframe. Just get a little bit of power strength, a little bit of range, and you're cooking. Things will die. Sight is an easy S tier, and you should definitely get him because he's going to put in crazy, crazy work. I would put Daggett in subpar, but very usable, aka B-. Ultimately speaking, because she's a weapons platform that doesn't really do anything out there or super stellar. There is obviously the nuke build with her 4 with Rakali's Cavalry, but even then, it's a line nuke rather than an AoE nuke. And again, Warframe is in a meta where it's all about blowing up rooms in the most effective way possible. And it'll still get the damage done because Viral, especially with the given armor rework, has become a far more valuable damage type, essentially the meta damage type in most cases. And she just in general provides Viral, has decent survivability with Grave Spirit, and Weird Scythes will get the job done in terms of spreading your influence and giving you that damage bonus. I will give her some credit because she has a variable and multiple playstyles which she can operate in, but ultimately speaking, I wouldn't rate her super duper highly just because she can have survivability issues at higher levels of Steel Path, and her nuking with Rakali's Charge, although will kill things, does tend to get outscaled eventually. She is a great Warframe though, and I wouldn't not recommend you play her. Not the hugest fan though. El Dantissimo is the easiest S tier ever. Now, our boy El Dantissimo is nearly everything you'd want in a Warframe. In terms of, although you realistically can't really make that great of a weapons platform setup with him, just due to like the way like your book works and shit like that, right? You can, effectively speaking, make your entire team and yourself immortal via light verse. You have you do some nasty AoE damage via dark verse, and your final verse combinations, be it triumph, tragedy, Word Warden, or Pace Flight all have their uses, which Pace Flight spreading slash to the enemies, which is obviously not that great anymore, but still very valuable. Triumph being the legit, I cannot physically die with the gang button. Tragedy being a solid AoE nuke because it inherits heat and toxin effects all in a single blast, which means you status prime, you get that bad boy ready, and you send out the boom. And ultimately speaking, although Noctua is a solid exalted weapon, it's also a free helmet slot, which you can ultimately move pretty much anywhere to anything, whether be it roar or otherwise. Dante is a fantastic frame, and having him in your arsenal is super duper worth it because, be it low investment or high investment, there's nearly no content in the game that you can't very easily get through with Dante. And you'll very, very comfortably do that content because you'll do a fuck ton of damage, you'll simply never die, and you have a ton of build options for how you want to mod your Dante. heavily recommend get this Warframe. Shout out to my boy El Nantissimo. Ember, unfortunately, and again, tier lists are meant to be somewhat objective, but there's also subjectivity to this. And I personally, and my job, a very high investment Ember, think she has to go in B minus. Why do I think she can go in B minus? The reason I think Ember is B minus boils down to Temple exists, Uriel exists. And because those Warframes exist, she has been power crept into the fucking floor, and there's no reason to play her outside of you have her heirloom skin and you think it looks pretty, which is why I occasionally play my Ember. Allow me to explain. Ember's kit uses, in the weapon platform setup, you use Fireball Frenzy to get a bunch of fire damage augmentation onto your weapons, because fire damage is great, and you can just do a bunch of damage, and you usually subsume Inferno off with Roar. Cool. You can do the exact same thing with Temple to a greater effect, because the fire damage buff to weapons on Temples 3 is literally almost triple the maximum possible value you can have on Ember's fire damage buff with an augment. So that fucking blows. Immolation is damage mitt, but it's inconsistent due to the fact that you have to build it up. It costs God knows how much fucking energy, especially once it reaches cap, and you have to constantly like micromanage it with your 3, which does indeed armor strip, but also does no fucking damage whatsoever, and also costs energy. Whereas on Temple, you can just press 3 and run around with invulnerability. That also applies your 750% fire damage buff, or you can play Uriel, press Redendium, and instantly get a fucking shield gate on the spot, while also healing all your boys. Inferno is just comparatively speaking, just not that strong. You need to cast it multiple fucking times, status prime out of your skull to make it realistically kill in any sort of timely manner. And why would you do this when you can play Temple and simply shit out fire with Lizzie, and it would just kill things because Lizzie's a moddable weapon that can apply viral every other mixed element and also scales better because of Temple's crit. Or you can play Uriel, and granted you need to build it up, but you activate Brimstone and in the process reenact Chernobyl and kill everything in the immediate area in a much more effective and efficient way. Unfortunately, although I do actually like Ember quite a bit, she's just very, very power crept, and to a degree I think needs a rework and notable buffs, because I do think she's just incredibly mediocre right now, especially given your other options available. She obviously isn't by any means dog shit and is 100% usable, because this is Warframe after all. You can make any frame usable if you so desire. I don't think she's that great, and there's not a ton of reason to use her, and so she's going in B- for me. Moving on to Equinox. This is gonna sound really, really harsh. And Cam, if you're watching this, I'm sorry, my friend, but I honestly think that Equinox is D tier. I don't really see a huge reason to use her basically ever, honestly. Mend and Maim is just slow, inefficient, and not that great. Power transfer should be a part of the fucking skill. You know what I'm talking about. Rest and Rage is okay, but again, it needs like a bigger AoE and hardly affects enough enemies. There's also next to no reason to go into Night form in most cases. And Pacify and Provoke is a solid ability, and obviously, giving your boys free power strength is fucking amazing until you realize Noko exists. There is genuinely, as far as I can think of and tell, no reason to truly lock in Equinox into any mission, and I don't think she's super duper worth it at all. And I very much so think that she is in need of a large rework or a series of buffs, one or the other. And yeah, I'm sorry, Equinox players. She needs help. Excalibur is an A-tier Warframe. So, Excalibur, for the long and short, right? does everything you want him to do. Radio Javelin does decent damage and is also an easy helmet slot if you don't really want to go caster. Radio Howl gives you the CC damage, the stealth multiplier buffs, which is always great. Slash Dash is a form of survivability and damage, which this shit has silly range, which makes it a fun mobility tool for flying around the open areas. I do it all the time. And obviously, the bread and butter of his kit, Exalted Blade. With Chromatic Blade, will just simply give enemies Giga Cancer, and you'll just do infinite fucking damage. And with the recent rework to Exalted weapons as a whole, Excalibur can now use melee influence. So when you're shitting out your sword waves through fucking walls, applying electric, nuking everything in the area, and just things just dying, there's not really a huge need for survivability if they're all just dead because you've melee influenced the map. In short, Excalibur is great. Also doesn't require too much investment to get up and running. A solid Warframe. A solid Warframe. Yeah, honestly, you can't really go wrong with him in the vast majority of scenarios. And the only reason you wouldn't play him is because you probably already played him too much because you start a Warframe. And you're usually the go-to for most peeps. Shout out to Excalibur, the GOAT. Frost. My personal most played Warframe. Although definitely fallen out of personal favor with me. And also the Warframe that I share a name with. I'm personally going to put in probably A. Now the reason I'm putting Frost in A is because although his entire kit is just Avalanche at this point, it's a matter of how much that truly does, right? In reality, right? Because as we know from Atlas, but not to the same degree as Atlas, if one ability just does enough shit, the frame kind of just functions, right? Snow Globe still has its usages, and you can get a lot of value out of it in defense missions, especially considering it's invulnerable for a bit. Freeze has the whole Freeze Force augment, which allows you to get that weapon platform build going, because cold damage as a whole has been massively buffed by D, because the whole people take more crit damage from things that are affected by cold. And obviously Avalanche, his more or less his entire kit at this point is just kind of a fantastic ability. You press 4, enemies get CC'd in a pretty huge radius, assuming your build is decent. They get 10 stacks of cold applied to them instantly, which means they freeze when you're getting that inherent bonus crit damage. With the 2 legit mandatory augments, you're applying Overguard to yourself and the whole gang. You're removing 100% of enemy armor, again, assuming you have enough power strength, which it doesn't require much. And with the augment, you're more or less turning everything that you're holding in terms of weapons into a guaranteed crit or red crit weapon, because 200% more crit damage and crit intake, which with how strong Incarnon weapons are, you basically build your Frost, slap on an Incarnon weapon, and congratulations, you're going nuclear, because things will just simply die. And Overguard as a whole is an incredibly strong survivability tool, because it gives you PSF, and it just increases your overall HP pool by a lot. And you're applying this to the whole gang and armor stripping. I'm not saying anything else you guys don't really know. So yeah, Frost, A-tier Warframe. There's hardly any content in the game where he won't do pretty solid in. And with Nourish being a thing, he just ends up being a really, really, really solid weapons platform. Can't really go wrong in my opinion. Gara, also A-tier. I mean, there's not really much to say with Gara that you wouldn't already know. I mean, her 3 is just a Helminth, but that's pretty much the end of the weaknesses when it comes to her kit. The recent Exalted rework made it so her Shattered Lash does a billion damage. It goes through walls and applies melee influence. So you literally swipe right, and there goes the area code. Splinter Storm is 90% damage mitt, and obviously having survivability is always helpful, which can also apply to objectives, meaning, in the niche case that you need to make sure objectives survive, you can, which is convenient. Mass Vitrify has some decent CC, and also scales your Splinter Storm. Splinter Storm scales literally infinitely, which means there will never come a point where Gara isn't able to kill things, assuming she's playing the game by popping this shit with Shattered Lash, which Shattered Lash will kill the area code. So in short, unkillable, infinitely damage scaling CC monster that does everything you need it to do, assuming you're playing the game and being somewhat active. Gara is a great Warframe, and the only reason she isn't S tier is because she does take some level of investment to really get off the ground, because you do need quite a bit of duration and some decent melee mods to make Shattered Lash really start to like do its thing. But ultimately speaking, she's great, and you're not really going to go wrong investing in her. Garuda. I personally would consider Garuda maybe not A tier, but definitely B. So with Garuda, number one, and this is a very funny thing to say about Warframe, she's hard to play because she has a super active play style by maintaining your Dread Mirror, using your Dread Ball to like do damage and shit like that, watching and maintaining your health via bloodletting. Seeking Talons is a little bit weak now. It used to be actually like really, really strong, but then it has like weird properties with its range and its overall like cone, but it's still fine because of the way the slash implication and application works. And Blood Altar can be kind of slow. With the Helmeth, this is largely not an issue because again, Nourish exists, but she's hard to play because of how active she is and the amount of work she needs to put in to survive in a lot of cases, just because she's relying very heavily on her Dread Mirror just keeping her alive and then AoE nuking with the Blood Ball from Dread Mirror. But again, if you know how to play Garuda, and again with her Talons being also a decent melee weapon, you'll get the job done. Like, she's fine. Like, she is just fine and a good and a decent enough Warframe. Moving on. Gus, or Gauss. S tier Warframe. So, to the people who will see this tier list video, I'm not telling you anything you don't know when it comes to Gauss, but for those who don't know, let me explain. There is no content in Warframe where Gauss will not excel, literally ever. Mach Rush is a great mobility tool for getting around in those funny open worlds, and also can do quite a bit of damage, assuming you mod for it. Kinetic Plating makes you legit take no damage from IPS values at all. Like, you can just simply become immune to damage. Like, you have pseudo invulnerability, and there you go. So, not dying is pretty sick. And there's ways to circumvent. Then there's a lot of ways to circumvent Toxin as well with Helmets. Thermal Sunder, which is his Helmet, by the way, is one of the best low-level AoE nukes in the game. You pop it, things die, you win. The clap do be going crazy. Like, you just fucking build a ton of range, slap this shit, and go crazy. And then Redline. Gauss, as of this recording, is the only Warframe in the game that can buff his casting speed. And, I mean, just look at this buff. This shit is cracked. You are probably one of the single strongest weapon platforms in the game because you turn everything into just an absolute fucking monster because you give yourself fire rate, attack speed, reload speed, and casting speed. And as long as you're somewhat active in what you're doing, it's really hard to fail with Gauss because you cannot die. You do a fuck ton of damage, you're fast as shit, and you're just nuking the whole planet by clapping your hands together and creating your fucking domain expansion. S tier Warframe for free, and also doesn't require too much investment. In truth, all you need is a tiny bit of power strength and a ton of duration, and there you go. Your Gauss is online. Gus is a sick Warframe, and you should play him. That Warframe is fucking cracked. Warframe is actually cracked as fuck. Grendel is an average Warframe. So, although Grendel's rework did make him a lot better, Grendel has one glaring issue as a Warframe, and that's Despite Nourish originating from him, he is the worst utilizer of Nourish. For those who don't know, Nourish is Grendel's Helminth. And Nourish, as you can see from this description, is an insane ability. Your weapons apply viral, a ton of it actually. And not only do they apply viral, it also applies a viral damage increase, along with making it that your energy, benefits from all sources is multiplied, which makes it like one of the best energy economy abilities in the game. The problem with Nourish is on Grendel in specific is that you need to have enemies in your belly via Feast to activate Nourish, whereas other Warframes, literally every other Warframe in the game, doesn't. Meaning, especially in lower content, he has a really hard time managing his Nourish, and it ends up being kind of cumbersome and annoying, and making him just extremely inconvenient, despite the fact that Nourish is his ability. Other than that, he's a great Warframe because Pulverize has a bunch of funny niche builds, especially given the fact that you can armor strip with it, which is always fun. And Regurgitate is actually a decent AoE nuke if you build for it, because it strips armor and does hella toxin damage. But again, I have to demerit him pretty heavily just because despite Nourish being a cracked out ability, he's the worst utilizer of it, despite the fact that it comes from him. But he's still solid. Good old Gyre. Now, this might be a bit of a hot take, and some people may disagree with me very heavily. But I think Gyre goes in C tier. Why do I think Gyre goes in C tier? Gyre as a Warframe requires very, very heavy investment. Like, very heavy investment. Now, why does she require very heavy investment? Her 1 and 2 are hardly worth using, even with the augments that make them a little bit better. And her whole thing is that she's going to AoE nuke and also function as a weapons platform via Rotor Swell and Cathode Grace. Now, personally, I would not demerit a Warframe for needing an augment to do its game plan, because at the end of the day, it is what it is, and if the Warframe functions, the Warframe functions, and that's just how I personally see it, and this is my tier list, so whatever. The problem with Gyre is that she has survivability issues. You need to get a Helminth to make her Rotor Swell, even despite the augment, actually do notable damage, especially once enemies start scaling. And it just requires a lot of investment to really get it going. Now, don't get me wrong, and to be clear, with that investment, Gyre is actually, in my opinion, quite fucking cracked. I'm talking, you get the Rotor Swell Cathode Grace combo going, you slap Pillage over her second ability, you pillage the enemies, right? They lose all their armor and a bunch of their shields, assuming you're at about like, I think 280, 300-ish power strength, and then boom, 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 your Rotor Swell is just clapping things, just shit's blowing up, and it's super AFK. However, and it also helps with a lot of your survivability issues since you get an on-demand shield gate. But again, that is very high investment. And there are just a lot of Warframes in the game who can do a very similar thing to a very similar effect at much, much, much lower investment, which is why I put her where she is. I actually, again, very much so enjoy Gyre, and I'm actually optimizing my Gyre build as we speak. But again, I just think that the sheer amount of investment you need to make her truly get the most out of her holds her back. Hero. Hero is a B-tier Warframe. Mainly because and the reason I put him here is because he's kind of fundamentally flawed. He's a support that hates playing with other people, which is funny. But he has a ton of chill setups with Evade that kind of just make him, like, in my opinion, one of the best weapon platforms in the game. You can give yourself a more or less instant shield gate with Condemn because it just giga generates your shields. Penance is a nutty ability because you get effectively infinite fucking energy, assuming you're just killing things or head tapping things. Thurible is, in my opinion, his Helmuth slot, which is what I often Helmuth off in my builds. But, you know, it is what it is. But again, you can just give yourself an infinite energy resource. But again, there's other methods to do this. And Covenant is disgusting because, one, it makes you invulnerable, which is another layer of survivability on top of the evade setups if you're running it, or just more survivability in general if you're running a base hero with, you know, shield gating being your focus. It also gives you a ton of crit chance with disgusting headshot damage multipliers, which is always fucking fantastic, which turns a lot of weapons into red crit weapons. And Penance just gives you insane amounts of fire rate and reload speed, making pretty much every gun in the game feel really good to use because they fire at Mach 27 and you reload them fucking instantly. This is quite biased, if I'm being honest with you, but I actually very much so deeply enjoy Harrow, and I think he's a fantastic Warframe. And again, in my personal opinion, one of the best weapon platforms in the game, like right up there with some other Warframes I will mention later on. Great Warframe, and IMO can't really go wrong. He does take some investment, but nowhere near as much as other Warframes on this list. Now, the reason he's average is because he's a support who hates playing with other people, and that doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it? Now, Hildren, in my personal opinion, is an A-tier Warframe. Now, why do I think Hildren is an A-tier Warframe? It's mainly because of the augment on her 4 with Balefire, and with secondary Innervate, turning her Balefire into a red crit weapon. She's the original owner of Pillage, one of the best survivability tools in the fucking game, because, I mean, armor strip, instant shield regain, especially at higher levels, etc., etc. Her problem is that her 1 and her 3 are effectively useless in terms of casting them normally, but that's always just a free Helmuth slot, which is always pretty chill, and you can put a lot of shit in there. And she just kind of just does the whole I'm an attack helicopter thing and survives in a lot of content really, really, really easily. There's not much to say. I actually have a just really big soft spot for Exalted Weapon Warframes in general. She does take some investment to get off the ground, and you do kind of need her augment to really do a lot with her, but she feels really good, and the more you invest, the stronger she becomes by quite the margin. And there just kind of comes a point in time where you just cannot die because you press 2 and your shields are full and you have a 3-second shield gate. She also has the benefit of not being an energy Warframe, using her shields to cast her abilities, which means that, like, you know, you're never sitting there just wondering what the fuck can I do, because you usually always have an option readily available. So that's why I put her there. But again, some may disagree. Hydroid. I think Hydroid is A tier, mainly because corrosive damage is a really strong status effect in general, and he's kind of just corrosive the Warframe. It's pretty easy to like, you know, survive on him. Although he can't really use arcane preservations too well because of his low armor, this largely doesn't matter just because he can CC enemies pretty hard with his Plunder and his Tidal Surge, just applying Giga Corrosive, and he ends up being a pretty solid weapon platform. Also, if you're an earlier game player, you can loot for him pretty hard, but I'm personally not the hugest fan of Hydroid, but just because I'm not just the biggest fan of his playstyle, but I can't deny that he is very strong and can get a lot done just because, again, he is corrosive the Warframe. So swiftly moving on, Inaros. I actually consider Inaros a B tier Warframe, a B plus Warframe. Why do I consider Inaros a B plus Warframe? If we weren't playing the old piece, I would tell you he's not that great, but is still solid. But we are playing the old piece. And the thing about the old piece is that the old piece introduced arcane preservation. And Naros had this issue where once enemy levels and stuff like that get high enough, he just dies because enemies will just do like 500k damage and one shot your 10k HP. But then they introduce arcane preservation, and now he has I was gonna say unnullifiable mesmer skin, but then DE decided to nerf it because DE. But he has permanent mesmer skin with arcane preservation, and he can just simply do the whole health taking thing, not die because he can just heal himself with desiccation or his scarab swarm, which also applies corrosive damage. So big CC, big armor strip, and also AoE heal for himself. You have the funny Minion Mancer builds with him, where when shit dies to your Scarab Swarm, you get your funny Sand Kavats, which, especially with like, certain like setups for like pet multipliers, you can do some crazy damage that I've seen. And he has his usages. Sandstorm is actually a funny nuke, but it does require some investment to actually like get going and off rolling. But it's also another form of survivability because you do just become invulnerable while channeling. So in short, if you simply never want to die, you play an Aros. And if you like cats and corrosive damage, you also play an Aros. So he's solid. He's nothing to write home about just because he doesn't like excel at anything besides surviving, but he's great. He's great. Moving on. Ivara. Just like Ember, power creep to the floor. Look, I actually really like Ivara, and I actually enjoy how she looks too because she's a little jellyfish. However, she's just her playstyle is so slow in Modern Warframe. And on top of her playstyle being so slow, her exalted weapon is just so mid. So basically, right, her quiver ultimately only has two of these, being the zip line for the funny crit setups and the invis bubble, because invis is obviously very strong in this game. However, it requires you to be stationary and chill in one place, and ultimately doesn't have that many usages outside of very, very niche setups and specific mission types. Navigator doesn't really do much besides you see really big funny numbers here and there, but the problem with Navigator is that it used to be insane for Eidolon hunts, but that's dead content now. So like no one fucking cares. So you often will see this get Helminth if you are even using Ivara in general. Prowl is on paper insane because you get legit infinite fucking stealth because it literally will just drain next to no energy at all. The problem with Prowl is in a high mobility game like Warframe, you lose your mobility, which just isn't great at all. And you can argue, why the fuck would you ever do this, legit ever, when Site 09 exists and Evade is his Helminth? The extra loot is okay, but ultimately it just slows down her playstyle so heavily that it just isn't necessarily the greatest thing in the world, especially given Modern Warframe, where once again, everyone who wants to use Invis is running around with Evade, permanently stealth, but without the crippling handicap of losing your mobility. And simply put, Artemis Bow just doesn't do enough damage to really warrant it. Like, yeah, you have some funny setups with the augment where you get concentrated arrow and you head tap them in funny AoEs, but it's niche at best, and also again it's just slow because the AoE radius of concentrated arrow isn't big at all, even when properly modded for. She just isn't that great and has definitely been heavily power creeped. 100% still viable. 100% you can still do any and all content with her and get the job done without question. But again, heavily power creeped. Heavily power creeped. And although it is worth using because, again, you will get the job done, there's just such stronger options that it's hard to make an argument for it. Jade just kind of does a little bit of everything and is solid in most cases. Her exalted weapon, Glory, is a great user of this funny thing we call Cascadia Flare because it does fire damage and is considered a pistol. She's a solid AoE nuker with Light's Judgment and Judgment Flare from the alt fire of her Glory on High. She is trying to do a lot of things and succeeds by giving herself and her allies a power strength buff and shield regen buff along with a weapon damage buff, making her a decent weapons platform, assuming you don't want to use her exalted weapon for whatever reason, because it's kind of awesome. And although Ophinum Eyes is ultimately her helmet slot, having a little bit of armor strip and a tiny bit of fire damage along with a slow does increase her overall survivability, although I personally think that you should just use aerodynamics and aviator because me when I fly. But overall, she has a solid base kit, and even with helmet, she just becomes that much better, being able to nuke rooms, support allies, and survive relatively easily just by simply flying around and having a ton of damage once again via aviator and aerodynamics. There's not much else to really say about her except she's just great all around and functions as both an exalted weapon user and weapons platform. Also doesn't require too much investment to get off the ground as well. I mean, aviator is aerodynamics is a fucking bronze mod. Just get it, and you won't ever die on this frame. I will say she does need a deluxe skin because playing as the pregnant lady is kind of weird. DE, it's kind of weird. Moving on. Cora. Easy S tier for me. Now, why do I think Cora is S tier? The recent update made it so that her Whip Claw scales with attack speed, so you're just absolutely nuking things at Mach 27, and it's fucking great. The recent Exalted Weapon rework made it so she no longer needs stat sticks to function, making her much lower investment. You no longer need to be MR 14 to get the Incarnon Rakta Dark Dagger to then actually make her fucking work and function. And now she has access to melee influence on her Whip Claw. So the gameplay loop: Whip Claw, area code dies, Whip Claw. She is also one of the better shield gators because of this, because, well, she's constantly casting. And again, the changes that made it so her Whip Claw is affected by casting speed just made this feel that much smoother, that much snappier, that much quicker and cleaner. And that's just Whip Claw. And Snare, her helmet, by the way, one of the best grouping tools in the game because you build a little bit of range, and now you're just grouping up enemies so that you can once again Whip Claw them, so thus they die, thus you win. Venari, she's also the only Warframe in the game that can have two companions at the same time, because even if you helmet off Venari, you still get to keep her, and she is fully moddable, just like any other companion. So you can have one companion for priming and another for like chill utilities, making it so her overall survivability and use cases and overall comfortability in a mission is just much higher than other Warframes, because again, two companions is kind of correct, and you just kind of win. And Strangle Dome is just a better version of Despoil, in my opinion, just because, well, it's just a great loot framing ability, and also is a pretty free helmet slot if you want to go with alternative setups to make Whip Claw better. There's not much else to say. I personally just think that Cora just has a well-faceted and well-rounded kit with a lot of flexibility in what you want to and what you can do with her build, and I think she's fantastic, and you should play her. Cope May. Cam, if you're watching this, or when you do watch this, once again, I am so fucking sorry. And I really mean this with all my heart. Cope May is just not a very practical Warframe. Now, before the level cappers and angry people who are my friends will watch this video, please understand. I know that she's not horrible. I know that she has use cases. But here's the problem. You are gambling on what your buffs are. Even with Omakuji's Fortune, it takes 3 fucking hours to get every single decree in the game. There are certain decrees that you will get that will just simply fuck up your setup in some way, shape, form, or function. And her play style and where she will eventually apex in terms of strength is so fucking slow. In a game as fast as Modern Warframe, I just don't think she's practical. She does have the one benefit of she requires no investment, because trying to invest in her to function as a normal Warframe would be so expensive, it's not fucking worth it. That you can just kind of just play for the RNG and then just ultimately just use weapons and shit to compensate for this. But again, it's just a matter of she just isn't practical. And her lack of practicality as a Warframe is why I'm putting her as low as she is. I think that there needs to be fundamental changes to the design philosophy of her kit, because although I do think it's ambitious and cool, I don't think it works very well at all. And I think she needs to be changed. Also, DE, you made a good choice making her only a 24-hour craft. All Warframe should be 24 hours, by the way. DE, please change this. 3 days is crazy. Moving on. Kalervo, the criminal, dude. And one of my personal favorite Warframes, by the way. If you want my personal and honest opinion, I actually think Kalervo is an S-tier Warframe. Why do I think Kalervo is an S-tier Warframe? In short, Wrathful Advance is a disgusting ability that makes every single melee in the game red crit, which is also his helmet, so everyone can have it. Which is also the reason, like, you know, Ash's fucking Shadow Clone's gonna red crit, by the way. Recompense is an incredible survivability tool because you give yourself overguard along with building yourself combo count, which means you can just stack up those Incarnon weapons super duper fast to get the Incarnon modes online, or just live. And this ability's one major issue was patched via the volatile recompense augment, where you're spreading blast and just permanently generating overguard by breathing, which is always great. Collective Curse not only functions as an AoE nuking tool for Wrathful Advance, but it also functions as a way to go for silly weapon platform setups on him, where you can turn single target weapons also into AoE nukers via the AoE damage redirection, where you can make shit like snipers or single shot pistols or assault rifles just clear rooms because you just, by shooting one guy, you shot every guy in the room. So again, just heavy merit toward his weapon platform setup. And it's also because of Collective Curse, where if you build for it, you can make him a caster. You can make him a caster room clearer with Storm of Ukko, where you can basically have an infinitely cascading effect between Storm of Ukko's multiple instances of damage and Collective Curse, just permanently and constantly applying 100% of the damage of Storm of Ukko to every enemy affected by Collective Curse. So in short, you can't die. Every melee in the game that you're holding red crits. You turn single target weapons into AoE weapons, and you can nuke rooms assuming you build for it. Tons of build variety. You get to survive for free, and free red crits. I honestly don't think that there's anything this Warframe is truly bad at, and in my honest opinion, the only thing you need to make this Warframe work is a singular intensify mod, so that you generate a decent bit of overguard, and you reach that threshold where Wrathful Advance gives you red crits on your melee weapon, and there you go. You're online. So low investment as well. I think Kalervo is fantastic, and I would argue till I'm blue in the face that he is deserving of S tier. Lavos. Valence formation, valence formation, valence formation, valence formation, valence formation, valence formation. Moving on. I'm totally leaving that in the video. Anyway. Limbo. Fundamentally flawed Warframe that is legit disruptive to other people's gameplay and is hardly worth using. There's not a lot to say here, and we're going to move on. Loki. Average Warframe. Why is Loki an average Warframe? Although everything he does doesn't nuke necessarily, his Invis quality, his decoy I think should honestly do more and should actually pull enemy aggro, but again gets the job done, along with also being a decent secondary survivability tool. Radial disarm is pretty great, especially with the augment that makes it do radiation damage. And although I think Switch Teleport is his worst ability, it's an easy helmet slot, so you can make some funny weapon platform setups. He doesn't do anything super duper noteworthy, but you can survive super duper easily with him, get the job done, and that's all you really need in a lot of Warframes. Mag. I actually think Mag is an A-tier Warframe. Now, why do I think Mag is an A-tier Warframe? So let me pretense this by saying Mag, despite being a starter Warframe, is a decently high investment Warframe. Now, despite this, right, her one is dog shit and not really worth using unless you're doing very like jank and niche fucking like grouping setups. And any person who like, you know, chose Mag as their starter, base as fuck, by the way. That being said, I mean, let's look at it for what it is. Magnetize turns any weapon into an infinite damage fucking source where you put them into the bubble and congratulations, everything in there, the microsecond you shoot one bullet is doing God knows how much fucking damage, putting him into the damage blender. And with like weapons with high punch through, and especially the Nadaruk, you shoot once into this bubble, and then you watch them take legit the planet's worth of damage. Polarize is a solid armor strip and survivability tool for shield gating, along with just making Magnetize that much better. And Crush is a decent and okay AoE nuke, assuming you build enough power strength for it. TLDR, she's one of the best weapon platforms in the game because she turns everything you're holding in her hands into a fucking monster. And her only real like drawback as a frame is that she does take decent investment to invest in, which is why I will never understand why she's a starter frame. But all in all, fantastic Warframe, and IMO really can't go wrong. I think she's great. Moving on, we have Mesa. Now, I'm going to put Mesa at the top of A tier. Now, some people will definitely question me on why she isn't deserving of S. And in short, the reason I think Mesa doesn't quite break into the S tier more or less boils down to Peacemaker just takes a lot of investment, and it's not the most like friendly thing in the world to mod. You need a lot of arcanes, you need a lot of just mods in general. You need to build quite a bit of strength and range and shit like that on her to make her like really great. But this isn't to say that she isn't a fantastic frame. I mean, she has a damage steroid that she applies to herself and the whole gang. You effectively turn off enemy guns because they basically kill themselves shooting you, and 90% damage, well, 95% damage mitt is kind of hard to argue, isn't it? And I mean, Peacemaker is indeed Peacemaker. Like, you turn this shit on and everything in front of you will perish. And that's just a fact. But again, it's because of her overall investment cost, which is why I'm going to put her just below. Like, in my opinion, she's just right below S tier. It's just barely there. Again, that's going to be like my biggest hot take. And I know a lot of you will disagree with me, but this is just how I personally feel. Mirage. One of the best weapon platforms in the game. I mean, there's not a lot to say, really. I mean, Eclipse is a final damage multiplier. So you're just fucking tripling your damage, assuming you're running Hall of Malevolence on her one, so that you can just apply Eclipse to your clones, just legit tripling your damage, making anything that you're holding just do God knows how much. Prism is a decent AoE nuke, and with Prism Guard, you can do some funny setups where you're just running around with your ball and just or farming on enemies as you just watch them die to your lasers, which is always fun. Sleight of Hand is not that great, and it does have some funny niche setups, but this is mostly your helmet slot where you can just put more than likely Roar and Nourish, so who cares? Great Warframe, has a ton of amazing builds you can set up for, and easily one of the best weapon platforms in the game. A-tier Warframe. Top of A-tier Warframe. Nuts. Necros. I actually would say Necros is subpar but usable. And the reason I say this is because there's just better loot frames. And the other reason you're using Necros is to loot frame. And even then, Hydroid and Korra just kind of do it better, in my honest opinion. So it's like you get Necros because he's easy to get in the early game, and you're going to get that extra loot, which is going to be very valuable for you. But other than that, he's just not that great. And I just don't think he's worth really writing home about. Like, yeah, you have some funny setups with your Shadows of the Dead, but the Shadows of the Dead take a lot of investment to make it so they don't instantly decay and die due to their health decay. And their AI is kind of stupid. So, yeah, I'm going to put Necros a little bit lower just because I just think that he needs some help. Terrify is a decent armor strip, and I don't think Soul Punch is all that great. But again, that's just my rhyme and reason. I just don't think he's all that great. Neja. Easy A-tier Warframe. Divine Spears exists. Spreading your statuses via Blazing Chakram and just watching things die because you just pop them with Divine Spears is sick. I mean, you're so strong they need to nerf it. Warding Halo is some great survivability, especially considering it functions as a second Iron Skin, more or less. And Firewalker is just fun as fuck. You're also fast as shit. And yeah, there's just very few situations where I could think of where Neja would perform poorly. And I think he's just an easy A. Yeah. Yeah, I think Neja deserves that. Nova. Where the heck is Nova? There she is. Okay. I mean, is there anything that really... I don't think anyone will disagree that Nova is an easy A-tier Warframe. Actually, I changed my mind. Nova's going in S. Why do I think Nova is S-tier? I don't think there's a single mission in Warframe where Nova is bad. And I know that might sound like a stretch to some people, but hear me out. You spread blast and potentially fire damage with the Augment on Null Star. 90% damage mid as well. Antimatter Drop functions as a great AoE nuke that you can fully pilot and will just kill anything in the area. You make enemies take legit double damage and are slowed by 75% or sped up by 75% for farming runs. With Molecular Prime, making her a great weapons platform, and also just allowing for that AoE nuke playstyle with Antimatter Drop. And Wormhole is one of the better mobility tools in the game, especially for those big open worlds, or it's just a free helmet slot. And she doesn't take much investment at all to get off the ground. All you really need, in truth, a tiny bit of duration, a little bit of power strength, and boom, your Nova's online. Your Molecular Prime slows people by 75%. It lasts long enough to spread across the immediate area that you needed to spread into, and there you go. There is no mission in the game that I can honestly think of where I wouldn't appreciate having a Nova on my squad ever. She is a fantastic Warframe and is just kind of one of the OG goats. So there you go. She also has like some free energy economy in her passive, so although it's not the greatest, it helps. Nidus is going in D tier. Now, he's going to go at the top of D tier because you can use him, and he is fine. And he doesn't require super high investment, but his playstyle is just way too slow. It's way too fucking slow, and it hardly works in modern Warframe. He kind of needs help, and his playstyle needs to be sped up quite a bit. And there's honestly not much to say. There's legitimately no reason off the top of my head I can think of that I would ever bring a Nidus over more or less any other frame. Noko. Noko is an S tier Warframe. High key. So let's put it this way, right? Like, Noko, right? Noko can AoE nuke. Noko can AoE nuke and apply viral very easily. has great survivability with reroute, is effectively immortal assuming you set up shop. His shop is easy to set up because of Stink Brain just being a fast to cast and also providing viral to the entire area, and is an effective energy battery for himself and the gang that just gives you functionally infinite energy, along with the fact that he can give the entire gang a fuck ton of power strength, just making the whole gang better. So it's like, in short, right? I have an energy battery nuker Warframe that is unkillable and makes the whole team better by giving a fuck ton of power strength. And it's kind of hard to argue if that would ever be bad, legit ever. So yeah, that's pretty much all there is really to say. Like, he doesn't really do anything super duper poorly, and I'd argue he's S tier. I think he's just fantastic. Nyx. I actually think Nyx is quite average. Now, don't get me wrong. Nyx doesn't die at all, ever. But at the same time, she applies radiation damage, which isn't the best damage type in the world. The AI for her mind control is kind of bad. Even with the augment, to make it better, it's still kind of bad. And although she's a decent weapons platform because of the whole crit thing on on enemies who are affected by like mind control and stuff like that, she doesn't really do anything to write home about. She kind of just runs around with her guns and doesn't really die. And she does this in like a slightly less efficient way than Revenant, which I'll get into later. And again, although her kit is great because, I mean, she gets to survive really easily, because even if you don't want to use her for it, you can remove Overguard and do that with her Psychic Bolts. Her one just doesn't do anything noteworthy, and you just become really, really slow with the augment on her for Absorb. So because she's not really doing anything super duper crazy, and she kind of just doesn't die and shoots gun, give her a B. Oberon recently got reworked, and now he can function in way more missions, but I still think he deserves B tier, and that's not B tier. I see. Where did I put him? Where the heck did Oberon go? Oh, there he is. Oh, wait, that's Valkyr. Okay. Well, let's move her down here. So, Oberon is deserving of B tier. Now, the reason I think Oberon deserves B tier is because Smite is a lot better, and ultimately gets the job done in terms of killing Eximus and doing some okay damage, which is great. Hollowed Ground applies hella radiation, which means he can take advantage of like some of the new old piece augments, and can use Arcane Universal Fallout really, really well. But Reckoning is still kind of mid, and ultimately does pretty mediocre damage, all in all. And Renewal is honestly just not worth using at all. Like, it doesn't really do much of anything for you. Like, the bonus armor is cool, but it's not nearly strong enough to be worth keeping on the kit, and I would honestly argue this is his helmet slot, so. Valkyr. Now, Valkyr's rework, and especially given the fact that the old piece came out and Arcane Perseverance is a thing, I'd argue Valkyr is fucking great. Because holy shit, that Warframe doesn't die. So Valkyr, right? Her Hysteria got reworked, so now it's just like she just has a far more active play style, in the sense of you kill things, you build up your passive. Your passive allows you to not die. Now, one of the things she ran into, or could run into more accurately, even though it wasn't likely, was after the 5-second immunity window of her passive runs out, you had the possibility of just getting shit on by some fucking random ass Eximus unit that shot you for 1 billion damage in between your invulnerability window. However, Arcane Perseverance makes it so you can only take 500 damage a second per instance of damage. So now she just lives. She just fucking lives. In between cycling her invulnerability and using Arcane Perseverance, you just don't die. And she procs this for free because she has 1,000 base armor to begin with. And on top of Warcry making her fast as shit and also further increasing her armor, making her just take that much less damage, and having a solid group tool and mobility tool in the form of Ripline, she's just all around great. She can function as a melee weapon platform as well due to the increased attack speed for Warcry if you so desire and don't want to use Hysteria for whatever reason. And although Paralysis is a pretty bad ability at the moment, it's a free helmet slot, and we love Helminth, so Valkyr, solid Warframe. And I would definitely put her in the A tier, especially given the old piece. Octavia. I'm going to keep this brief. Keep this very brief, okay? Octavia does everything. And on top of doing everything, she's quite boring. But she does everything. Massive damage throw rate for herself and the gang. Metronome giving every fucking buff you could ever want if we're talking about weapons platforming and surviving, because invis, armor increase, movement speed, multi-shot, melee damage. Resonator is legit infinitely scaling damage because it scales off the enemy. Mallet is infinitely scaling damage because of the enemy. And Resonator makes it so you just have another layer of survivability because it's running around charming people. And also moving around your Mallet, which ultimately can be helmethed off for even more damage or survivability or utility. This Warframe is... This Warframe is overall extremely fucking bloated. And she's insane. And probably will always be insane. Because D will never nerf her, because people don't like playing her because she's so loaded. Octavia is nuts. That Warframe is nuts. Araxia. It's an average Warframe. She got a lot better. She got a lot better because of the old piece and Arcane Perseverance being a thing, because she's technically a health tank, but also kind of not because Arcane Arachne and stuff like that. But does toxin damage, although she's not the best toxin damage platform. Has a funny minion build, although once again her spiderlings are a little stupid, but it's fine. It's fine. And Silken Stride again just makes her a solid health tank and gives her more toxin damage on her weapons, along with the explosion on kill and wall latch. So there's not much else to say except she's just a solid Warframe. And again, the old piece kind of covered up one of her biggest survivability issues. And if you like your weapons platform, she's not a bad pick. Araxia is solid and going in the B tier for me because I think she's average. Moving on. Brodia. Brodia's going in the S tier for me. So let's put it this way. Right? Let's keep it simple, right, fellas? She's the best shield gator in the game because she doubles the minimum shield gate time with her one. Blaze Artillery is some of the most disgusting scaling damage in the game, which got massively buffed by the old piece because arcane concentration is a thing in the game. So you can on demand get yourself a second prime continuity in there in terms of duration, making so her Blaze Artillery scales out of its fucking gourd. Dispensary is just an incredible energy economy ability, so whenever you need energy or ammo, you have it. And there's some niche setups you can do with the augment for her temporal anchor, allowing you to have basically a much, much, much longer duration turret at the cost of a cap at its multiplier, which, I mean, 2,000% damage as a multiplier cap is fine enough by me. At least I think so. And you honestly can't really go wrong with Protea, whether it be base kit or with Helminth. If you want to slap on Roar for just a gigantic damage steroid, she functions as just nutty AoE nuker and will just clear rooms because Blaze Artillery will just simply set the room on fire. Nutty Warframe, and just kind of works both in team scenarios, solo scenarios, high level content, etc., etc. She is fantastic. Corvex got a little bit better because of the old piece, but I would say he's subpar but usable. The nuking with his Crucible Blast is still kind of not the greatest, although it is made better. It is made better by his Desymmetric Guard recently, and his pillar. But I honestly wouldn't write home about Corvex, but he's all right. I don't really have a lot to say. He is just all right. Revenant. Now, this also might be a hot take. Everyone's going to say, Revenant is S tier. Revenant can never die, and thus he's the greatest Warframe ever. He's not even a weapons platform. And on top of not even being a weapons platform because it doesn't buff his guns in any way, shape, or form, the only thing he really does is a very niche nuking setup with Reeve. Enthrall is a relatively mediocre ability that hardly does much of anything except be a worse version of Mind Control. And it's just that Mesmer Skin hard carries this Warframe in every sense of the word because you are proper invulnerable. However, it's not so fucking strong in the sense of the overall Warframe that I would genuinely put him in S tier because of it. Yes, is Revenant an immortal object? Yes. Does that warrant him being considered the greatest Warframe of all time and deserving of S tier along with all of these other Warframes that I'm putting in S tier? Absolutely not. Because not only do all of these Warframes, assuming you're playing the game, can be effectively immortal, they also just have so much more in their kit that allows them to just have more effectiveness throughout the game. And that is why I will not be putting Revenant in the S tier. I will be putting him in the A tier because he is solid in most cases. You will not die, and you will go through Steel Path, Temporal Archimedia, Deep Archimedia, all that shit with ease with this Warframe because you will not die. That does not circumvent the fact that he has a relatively speaking blank kit outside of Mesmer Skin. Again, I am acknowledging that you do have some funny one-shot setups with Reeve, and you can make Danse Macabre do damage, but that's whatever, and hardly does anything close to the sheer value of all of these Warframes that I would deem S tier. So that is why Revenant is, again, not going in the S tier for me. Rhino is solid in most cases. I mean, there's not much to say except he is the original owner of Roar, up there with the most used Helminth in the game because faction damage multiplier. You have Iron Skin, so you will never die because the amount of overguard you get will scale with the enemies and how much tremendous damage they do to you. He's the only Warframe in the game that can have Roar and Nourish on one build because again, the original owner of Roar, and you have a bunch of funny setups you can do with Stomp to make it either AoE nuke or just do some crazy CC if you fancy shit like that. In short, he's a fantastic weapons platform that will just do a fuck ton of damage because again, he can have Roar and Nourish at the same time. So in short, assuming you play for him, doesn't require a crazy amount of investment, Rhino's great. Can't really go wrong with the Rhino. Saren is fucking Saren. Is probably the single strongest weapons platform in the fucking game. Because Toxic Lash is silly. You also have the caster setup where you just spread your spores and just let it cook people with miasma nukes, assuming you even want to press that button to begin with. Solid survivability with Molt, and again, Toxic Lash is just such a ridiculously stacked ability, which due to the way it functions and interacts with certain weapons, and the way it especially interacts with damage modification. She is stupidly strong, and you just win. You just win with Saren, and that's all there is to it. Sevagoth is an A-tier Warframe. Gloom is solid. Your Exalted Weapon is solid. It's great. Not much to say. Don't really care too heavily for that Warframe. Styanax. Although it took a bit of a buff and an augment to fix him, I would say solid Warframe. Average. Being able to make guns and shit red crit via his new augment with his shield smite, with his Thero strike, and his funny spear throws and shit like that, just doing actually a fuck ton of damage because they do blast and slash at the same time. And you can make some funny ass setups where you're just going, it's fucking sick. It's fucking sick. He has decent survivability because of Rally Point and the fact that he can just shield gate pretty often. And his Javelin just being a decent enough like helmet slot and also gripping tool. Solid Warframe. I wouldn't say he's anything to write home about, and I definitely wouldn't throw him in the A tier because I just don't think that he does anything like crazy better than all of these Warframes in A, but still solid. Temple, although a bit clunky, definitely deserving of the A tier. So, on-demand invulnerability, in the single highest fire damage multiplier in the game for when you want to do cool and funny weapon platform setups. Can make, granted, although is very clunky in its application, can definitely make everything fucking red crit. If they ever so wanted to, in truth. Lizzie is fucking disgusting because not only can she apply every mixed element, being viral, magnetic, cold, and corrosive, it also just does a fuck ton of damage and is also a red crit monster due to her base stats, and again, the fact that Overdrive is a button in Temple's kit. Pyrotechnics is a pretty okay like AoE damage skill, which you often will helmet off for other stuff in the setup. And the only real glaring issue I would say Temple has is that their casts are kind of long, and because their casts are kind of long, I personally feel like casting speed is a bit of a requirement on this frame. But outside of that, pretty fantastic. Temple just has a really well-rounded and very omni-applicable kit in most cases. Titania. I personally think Titania is good in a lot of scenarios. I do think that her Druada definitely needs some heavy puffs because holy shit, that shit sucks. But the Dexpixia is really, really solid. Her lanterns have some funny utility. And of course, you're fast as fuck because Razor Wing. Razor Wing is a thing. I wouldn't say she's applicable in all scenarios, but definitely does great. So we're definitely going to put her in the B tier. Trinity. Trinity works in a lot of scenarios, doesn't take much investment, only gets better with Helminth, has become an even lazier tank due to the old piece, and gives your team functionally infinite energy and is immortal. She's going in the B tier. Actually, she's going at the bottom of the A tier because I do think that she just works in a lot of scenarios. My boy Uriel. The newest. Yeah, I was good coffee. I'm actually recording. Yeah, I'm actually just recording a video. Yeah, I'm just like working out the record. Oh, just for my Warframe tier list. Not necessarily. It's just I really wanted to record a video because I just felt I love Warframe, and so I felt really strongly. And so I was just recording the audio for it, and then I'll have Maestro edit it a little bit for me, get some retakes going. So I'm actually almost done with the audio for it. I just need to finish like the latter half. So let me just finish that real quick. So let's see here. My boy Uriel. So Uriel is just kind of a super multifaceted frame, right? In one build, in reality, you can both make sick caster setups where you press 3 and or just interact with your minions in general, and then press Brimstone and you reenact Chernobyl, and everything in the immediate area is fucking dead because they just took 10 billion fire damage. Rest in peace, Ember, by the way. Or you build a fuck ton of power, strength, and duration, again, all in the same build with the caster setup, if you so wanted to, and now you just have an insane weapons platform because, again, he's inheriting fire damage from his rune. You're doing guaranteed heat damage procs, and you have a fuck ton of fire rate. So you're just getting things down and just doing a ton of bonus damage as well. Uriel is really easy to build, doesn't require crazy investment to get online, and via his minions has a ton of built-in economy with the inherent collective curse, the free dispensary via Golfagor, and the free fire rate buff from Ellie, as I like to call him. The only real problem is that sometimes this can be rather slow, and you also have to just rely on your minions to play the game. But in my experience playing Uriel, it's been pretty and hyper consistently like reliable. And I've been able to get like the value out of it a ton, because the loop that I've been playing with Uriel for the most part is shoot gun, build up Brimstone, and when I just fucking feel like it, press Brimstone, everything dies. And this is just a hyper reliable way to play it, and I'm going to rate him quite highly just because, again, right, normally for other Warframes, you have to kind of split down your build and, ultimately speaking, kind of deviate between one or the other when it comes to either caster setups or weapon platform setups. Uriel, via byproduct of his passive, doesn't necessarily need to do this, which is why I'm going to give him a plus merit. Uriel is going in the A tier for me. Vauban has a lot of funny setups, and ultimately speaking, works in like a lot of scenarios. His only real problem is he does take quite a bit of investment, especially to get his 4 to actually kill things. At least in my experience, was not his 4, his 3 to actually kill things. And I just don't think Tesla Nervos works in every scenario. So personally, I would rate him quite low. So I'm going to put him in the B tier. Next, we have Volt. I mean, there's very few things Volt does badly. Shock Trooper is a great augment. Shock Trooper is a great augment. So if you want to do weapon platform setups, you could. Speed is an incredible fucking buff because you become fast as shit. And you have reload speed, which reload speed is a very, like, you know, sparse resource you get on a Warframe to Warframe basis. Electric Shield is Electric Shield, which allows you to not only get the bonus electric damage, which electric damage is really valuable on Volt just because electric damage as a modifier scales with itself in terms of both the damage and the status proc. And Discharge is a decent AoE nuke, especially if you have a ton of power strength, and there's a little bit of CC there. Granted, it doesn't scale crazy well into the higher levels, but definitely for like mid to like lower level shit, you'll definitely clear rooms with this. Even then, he's just a fantastic weapons platform and works in like a lot of scenarios. He does have some minor survivability issues, but with Helmet, this can largely be circumvented. I would say Volt is solid in most cases, especially with a little bit of investment. Varuna. Now, I play my Varuna a lot, and I have a bit of a soft spot for her. I think that Varuna is deserving of, I want to say, the B tier, just because she does one thing, and that's you either weapons platforms. Well, she does two things. You either weapons platform super hard with her 1-2 combo, because you go invisible, you bite them, and then you just get the buffs from your 1 to just start shitting on kids. Or you do a setup with her 4 where you run around, chomp things, and then spread the statuses around in an area. There is also the setup where you get the Fangs of Rosh augment, where you then can spread your cancer that you apply to people via the bite to the people within a 50-meter radius, because that shit is disgusting, by the way, and just blow up rooms with status effects, which is, in my opinion, the most effective and efficient way to play her, by far, by the way. But again, you have options. It's just that this playstyle requires you to kind of be by yourself, because it's not super like co-op friendly, because you need to kind of pick and choose a very specific enemy, bite them, and then have them die. But you don't have to play this way. I just find it to be the most effective way to play her. So, because again, this is my tier list and this is the way I see it, I'm going to give her the B tier for now. Wisp is an S tier Warframe. She has multiple builds, be it caster or weapons platform. She is relatively high investment, but she does legit everything you want her to do. Breach Surge is one of the best AoE nukes in the game, because it just kind of constantly keeps bouncing off of people, just applying crazy damage. Reservoir is indeed Reservoir, where you just get a ton of fucking health and a disgusting fucking fire rate buff that scales really fucking hard with power strength. You have layers of survivability in between the CC from Breach Surge, the invisibility and invulnerability that you get from pressing Will-O-Wisp, and with the augment, because I personally would not recommend using Soulgate on its own. You can have funny caster setups where you basically set up the enemies with a bunch of your silly fireballs and just start watching them burn away, which interacts very funnily with your emotes, because you get that bonus damage and those corrosive procs, again, assuming you build for it. She does almost everything you'd want from a Warframe, which is survive, do damage, and have multiple builds that fulfill multiple roles and niches. She's incredibly valuable and super co-op friendly, just due to Reservoir being Reservoir. And you really can't go wrong with Wisp. Wisp is a ridiculously strong Warframe. Wukong, best spy mission Warframe, made a little bit better by the old piece due to Arcane Kareen, because that shit's funny. I wouldn't necessarily say he's the greatest, just because I think his clone is kind of ass. Iron Staff ultimately is great. Cloudwalker is a great button because you get true free mobility. And Iron Staff is a great melee influence weapon. I'm going to give him a B tier, just because I don't think he will excel over any of these frames. Overall, I do think his passive is absolutely cracked, but you also have to play for failure and die to get those benefits. And so in a lot of cases, he doesn't have a passive because you won't die with better builds. So I just think he's good. I think he's good. Moving on. Zaku. I think Zaku is a solid Warframe. Why do I think Zaku is a solid Warframe? He's one of the few Warframes in the game that can do void damage via Zada's Whisper, which is a solid damage steroid across the board. Grasp of Lock, your funny auto turrets. Scale based off the enemy, which means he technically has infinite scaling. The Lost is honestly a quite perplexing ability, but being able to armor strip and do defense shred ultimately makes Zada's Whisper that much better. And he has great survivability with the Vast on Time because he basically has effectively in near infinite duration on the rest of his kit, which can be used for helmets like Roaring shit. Well, assuming you take off Zada's Whisper, which again could be argued. Ultimately speaking, Zaku's pretty chill and fun, and Spooky Scary Skeletons with auto turrets is funny. I don't think there's a ton of missions where he would perform badly in, so I'm going to give him the A tier. Ureli. As much as I love Ureli, she doesn't have a super stellar kit that is super outspoken. Ultimately speaking, she's just okay. Like you have your sea snares, which you can throw out, which will CC enemies and make sure a decent weapons platform. Marilena by itself is okay, but regardless of what build you go needs either one of her augments to be functional, be it Loyal Marilena for the sake of the damage redirection, or Marilena Guardian for the nutty fire rate on secondaries, which kind of puts her in this position where you have to commit that augment slot to a very specific build setup, which can be somewhat restrictive, especially if you wanted to go with different setups. Aqua Blades is a terrible ability that is just simply a helmet slot in every sense of the word, because it is legit useless. And Riptide is a solid grouping tool, which interacts pretty crazily with AoE weapon setups. Shout out to you, Kuva Nukor. But again, it isn't so strong that I would write home about it. I personally think that Ureli, despite the fact that I actually really like her, is just an average Warframe. She's just not all that great. Last on the list is Zephyr. Zephyr has nutty mobility. She can turn off people's ability to do damage with her because she has arguably just a better fucking shatter shield because you just make bullets not hit you. Airburst actually is a decent grouping tool and can actually do quite a bit of damage given you have like a ton of enemies on screen. And Tornado makes her an excellent weapons platform because you're spreading statuses and CCing enemies. It also has a solid augment for it, which makes it a little more condensed, and you have a little bit more control over it. I actually think Zephyr just simply works in a lot of scenarios, and I think she's actually painfully underrated. She's going in the A tier for me. All that being said, that concludes my tier list. I might do some like last minute revisions or a minor re-record on certain parts, but for the most part, I feel very strongly about each and every placement that I've done so far. All that being said, that is my tier list, and yeah, that was fun.